and welcome to the Fertility New Zealand webinar series and tonight's webinar. Let's talk about sex. Fertility New Zealand walks alongside all people facing fertility challenges. We do this by providing support and information services and being the voice of this community through our advocacy work. I encourage you to jump onto our website and check out our services and connect with us on social media. Tonight, I am so pleased to introduce you to Jo Barnett, who is our wonderful guest presenter. Jo, a medical herbalist who has specialised in fertility, preconception and reproductive health for over 20 years. Jo's going to talk to us about covering your cycle, knowing the signs of ovulation, the timing of sex, and so much more. At the end, we'll have some time for questions. So pop them in the chat anytime, and then we'll go through them with Jo after her presentation. Cool. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Lydia. Hi, everyone. So we're going to have a wee chat about sex, timing, and understanding your fertile signs and symptoms. Understanding your fertile signs and symptoms and timing intercourse accordingly can be crucial. Well, it is crucial, actually, when you're trying to conceive. And many couples just have no idea of what they're looking for. And as your focus shifts from actively trying to avoid pregnancy to actively trying to achieve it, couples often will find them encountering barrages of information from lots of different sources. Avoid alcohol, avoid smoking, eat well, avoid chemicals and plastics. All these things are really, really important, particularly for fertility, but also to try and optimize the health of your child. But it's also really important to not overlook the core element, which is the act of lovemaking itself. Remember too that everyone's fertility journey varies greatly. Some will conceive quickly, while others will face many challenges along the way. So, for example, if 100 couples try to get pregnant in January, about 20 of them will conceive, leaving 80 to try again in February. And then if another 20% conceive in February, then 64 will still be trying in March. And following this sort of 1 in 5 success rate, by the end of 7 months, 78 couples will have conceived, leaving 22 not pregnant. Trying to conceive can take time. And when you start your journey, if you can, try and hold on to the understanding that you would like to conceive sometime over the course of the year ahead. This can help avoid some of the roller coaster rides that many couples face. And research shows if you can interpret your body's signs of ovulation and time your sex and conception attempts to your fertile window, your chances of conceiving in any one cycle are significantly higher. Oops. Sorry, just trying to move on to the next slide. An Australian study looking into women trying to conceive found that although more than half of them, actually 68% of women, felt they had their timing right for conception, only 13% accurately estimated their day of ovulation. An inaccurate understanding can lead to delayed conception and many cases of unexplained infertility. So let's have a wee look at the fertile window. Eggs live for only 12 to 24 hours, while sperm can be viable for up to 5 days, although there's not much left or not much vitality left after 3 days. And just knowing that itself, it's just incredible that anyone gets pregnant at all because it's such a tiny, tiny window each month. But in order to optimize your chances and for the healthiest conception, we want the sperm ready and waiting in the fallopian tubes for when that egg is released by the ovary, which is a process we know of as ovulation. And with intercourse, those optimal days for conception are the 2 days before ovulation and the day of, and this is known as your fertile window. So if you ovulate on day 14, then your most fertile days will be most likely days 12, 13, and 14. But many things like stress, illness, travel, being over or underweight, having polycystic ovaries, being anemic, having any thyroid problems, whether it's hypo or hypothyroid, and even excitement can all impact ovulation and contribute towards subfertility. So If you're confused or unsure, do reach out to qualified and experienced professionals for any guidance and support. Hang on, where are we up to? Sorry. Just having some, here we go. I think we're on the right side. Yeah. Okay, how often should we have sex? Sex 3 to 4 times a week or every other day during your fertile window should ensure there will be plenty of sperm ready and waiting up in the fallopian tubes for the release of the egg and hopefully for the magic of conception to occur. Statistically, there is little difference, about 4%, in conception rates between daily conception attempts and those trying every second day. So you do what works for you, but the take-home message is to try and have sex at least every second day during the fertile window. But if you have the energy and the inclination, every day is equally as fine. Another good question people will ask me is, how do I know when or if I ovulate? So ideally, a few months before you want to start trying to conceive, start tracking your cycle, which involves checking your basal body temperature and your cervical mucus secretions, and then recording all your fertile signs and symptoms. Personally, I prefer paper chart to fertility apps, and I'll kind of explain why as we go through. Most apps don't allow for gathering up the kind of information or the amount of useful information we need in one place, because I do like people to record also their secondary symptoms as well as your temperature and mucus, and this gives us just a lot more useful information. And secondary symptoms include things like bloating or fluid retention, or you might get sore breasts, or you might get some spotting. Your bowels might change from what your normal is. You may get energy or mood changes. Your sleep might change. And also you usually would find that your libido will rise when you're fertile. So most fertility apps rely on something known as the rhythm method, which involves tracking the number of days in each cycle. And this is known as your cycle length. It's really important information for understanding your fertility, and it's a good baseline, but it only works if you have a very regular cycle. Ovulation generally occurs 14 days before your period, which is not necessarily day 14. So you need to know when to expect your period and then work backwards from there, which is what your app typically will do for you. So using this approach, you look back on your last few cycles and you count the days. So day 1 is the first day of proper bleeding, and the last day of your cycle is the day before the next bleed begins. And this will give you your cycle length. So assuming you've got a regular 28-day model cycle, which not that many people do have, ovulation should occur around day 14, and your fertile window should start at about day 12. If you've got a 21-day cycle, this could have you ovulating as early as day 7, so your fertile window begins at day 5. It's also possible to have a shorter luteal phase, and this is the phase from ovulation through to your period. Or you could have irregular cycles, which really can confuse matters. So in these cases, the rhythm method or the fertility apps can actually create more confusion and be quite inaccurate. I reckon we can do better than that. So let's start by understanding your secretions. So this is just a little diagram. This is the cervix coming down here, and this is the vagina. So your cervix is coming down to the top of the vagina. And all uplining the walls of the cervix at the beginning are all these things called cervical crypts. And this is where your mucus is produced from. And we'll talk about this a bit more in a minute. But it's also where the sperm kind of travels and has a little nap. It goes a little bit further and has another little nap. So it's kind of like helping the sperm rest on its very long and arduous journey. And here's just a little image again of what your hormone, or actually what your estrogen is doing through the cycle. So that your estrogen is the hormone that governs what your mucus does. So you'll see here at the beginning of your cycle when you're bleeding, and in the early stages of your cycle, your estrogen levels are low, as is your mucus. So pretty much there's no mucus being produced, and if there is any, it's very dry, and you'll feel dry externally as well. as your estrogen starts to rise as you approach ovulation, this mucus pattern starts to break down. So you'll start to notice increasing amounts of more sticky and thick mucus, which will peak just before you ovulate and become quite wet, quite profuse, and quite obvious. And then after ovulation, estrogen levels drop and you go back to this sort of dry or very little amounts of sticky, thick mucus. You might get a little bit of wet mucus just before, about a week before you bleed, because you do get another small estrogen rise here, but this is not fertile mucus. And then as your estrogen drops off again towards your period, you'll find that you'll get pretty much back to no mucus at all. So, understanding your mucus secretion. So, for most of your cycle, your cervix will produce mucus, which acts as a barrier to sperm. Okay, so it's like a plug of thick white mucus that blocks the entry to the womb as both a barrier, like a physical barrier, and chemically, because it's got a whole heap of immune components that fight foreign materials as well. This mucus is known as infertile mucus, and you can see it primarily when your estrogen is low, just before and just after your period. And if you looked at it through a microscope, sorry, this isn't the best image, but you can see it's really dense, and there's no way that sperm can enter through there. And if it's getting, banging its head a lot against that mucus plug. But as your follicles start to grow in readiness for ovulation, your estrogen levels start to rise and the mucus will change and help it to facilitate the passage of the sperm towards the egg. And you can see here that here's that's partially penetrable mucus where the sperm can kind of get in and swim around, but honestly, it's getting a lot of headaches because it's banging its head against something all the time. Whereas when you've got fertile mucus, you can see it creates this lovely ferning pattern. This is like, imagine if you're looking at through a microscope, which actually channels the sperm and helps it on its journey. So you'll notice, that your mucus becomes increasingly plentiful. It's wetter, it's more slippery and stretchy in the days leading up to ovulation, when your peak symptom occurs just before that egg is released. Okay, so I've kind of gone through what those pictures mean. And many women too will also notice an increase in their libido at this time as well, which is, nature's way of trying to get a conception to occur. So how do you do this? Like, how do you check and record your cervical mucus changes? What you want to do is get into the habit of checking your mucus every time you go to the toilet. Before you urinate, you'll take a swipe at the mouth of the vagina, sit there, analyze it, and then at the end of the day, record your most fertile mucus for that day. It's really important just to get in the habit of checking every time you go to the loo. Because if you say, I'm going to check it at 10, 2, and 7, for example, you're not going to, and you're nowhere near a toilet, you're going to not pull your pants down in public and check your mucus for starters, and B, you're just going to forget. So it's just get it into a habit of what you do when you go to the toilet. So you're going to assess the mucus that you collect for color, for texture, for amount, for the external sensation, and then record the most fertile mucus for that day on your chart at the end of the day. And try and develop a consistent code that works for you over time to make that recording easy and readable. And this is probably not that easy and readable, but this is just an example of a bit of the chart that I like to use. So the bottom one here is external sensation. So this is where you might record how you feel externally. Do you feel dry? Do you feel moist? Do you feel wet? And then amount. I get people to record it as a bit more of like a bar graph, comparing it to the day before, because it's really hard to use words there. And then we have got color. So, it could be clear, white, yellow. If it's green, I would suggest, or really odorous, I would suggest you go and get checked by the doctor. And then texture, is it dry and flaky? Is it lumpy and moist, or, wet and slippery? So your basic infertile pattern can vary from none to dry, or for some people it's damp, it's pasty, it's flaky, it's crumbly, it's thick, or dense in those non-fertile phases. So what I'm trying to do too is give you some words that you might find work for you, because it can be a bit confusing getting started. As ovulation approaches, again, so we've talked about this already, and your estrogen starts to rise, the mucus changes to creamy or milky and starts to become wetter. And then fertile mucus is typically clear, it's wet, it's watery, it's slippery, it's slimy, or it's stretchy. And at ovulation, it's often a bit like raw egg white. But often you do pee that stuff out, so you might not notice that. But it's a really good question to ask yourself as you're sitting there on the toilet checking your mucus. How does the outside of your vagina feel, especially when you're moving around? Is it wet? Is it dry, moist, or damp? The wetter the sensation, the more fertile you are. The amount of mucus increases as you approach ovulation. So this is where you use that bar graph, I reckon, is the easiest way to record that. And remember, every female has their own unique pattern, okay? And this should become evident to you over a few months of charting. Okay, so this is just a few little pictures I popped in just to give you an idea. Okay, so this is your infertile mucus. It's thick, it's dry, it's flaky. When you hold, it holds its shape when you kind of pull it between your fingers, and the quantity doesn't change. Okay, so from day to day, it's about the same amount of quantity. And then you've got increasing amounts of still probably infertile mucus. So again, it's still quite thick and pasty and tacky, and it still holds its shape, but it's got lumpy bits in it. Okay, so if you remember back to that slide before of the microscope, you could see the sperm can kind of get in, but it's not able to find a path through. Okay, and you'll also notice in this phase, it's increasing in quantity. And then we've got our fertile mucus. Okay, so that's the clear or milky white mucus. Sometimes it's pink if you get a wee bit of mid-cycle spotting. It's wet, it's slippery, and there are no lumpy bits, and you've got increasing amounts. And then you've got what we call your extremely fertile mucus, which is also known as spin or spinbarkeit, excuse my terrible German pronunciation. But it's milky white, it's translucent, there's heaps of it. Sometimes it's a bit jelly-like or raw egg white, and it often is quite stretchy. Okay, so these might be quite useful for you to go back to as you start charting your cycle, just to help you get into the swing and thinking of some words to help describe what your mucus is doing. So immediately after ovulation, you've got that marked decrease in mucus production because your estrogen levels have started to drop off, with quite a quick return usually to your basic and fertile pattern. Now, you can confirm ovulation's occurred if you're charting your temperature also, and or using blood tests 7 days after you ovulate, okay? And I would just want to pause here to make this really clear. Often you'll be told to do a day 21 progesterone test. Not everyone ovulates at day 14. If you ovulate on day 14, great, day 21 is the right day. But if you ovulate on day 16, you want to do that blood test on day 23. So it's got to be 7 days after you ovulate. And it's a really good idea if you're doing bloods to actually check your estrogen at this time as well. So understanding your mucus pattern is really the best way to identify approaching ovulation and getting that timing right for sex, because the rhythm and the temperature method only confirm ovulation once it's occurred. So relying just on them, you would miss completely your fertile window. Now, there are some things that can be tricky to detect cervical mucus after sex, because of course the presence of semen can sort of make it look wetter than it is. And mucus can also be altered by some medications or infections. But you'll kind of work out how quickly you drain your vagina drains over the day and that kind of thing. And it's just a matter of just kind of within the early days, record as much detail as you can, and that will help you to understand and work out what your pattern is. And, someone like me is always here, and you can always book a time and get some help going over your charts. So when you're aware of your ovulation signs, you're a lot more assured of getting the timing right with sex, so you're using that fertile mucus, okay? And this can really dramatically increase your chances of success. And it's really useful to get onto this when you're starting the conception journey. Okay, so this is just another slide which I think you can have a wee look at later, just giving you an idea of what your mucus is like and when. Okay, Another good question I get asked often is, should males restrain from ejaculating to build up their sperm count? So some research indicates that regular ejaculation can improve sperm quality and maybe motility. And it seems that daily ejaculation can reduce the amount of DNA damage the sperm would otherwise suffer if it's stored for too long before a conception attempt. So based on this research, regular ejaculation leading up to the fertile window, but allowing a 2-day rest to let that count build before your conception attempts, seems to be ideal. So, 2 to 3 days is probably the ideal sort of building up days. Then having sex daily or every second day, depending on your energy and sex drive, in those 3 or 4 days leading up to and on the day of ovulation, are probably the most helpful to achieving a conception. Also, a lot of people ask me about urinary LH or ovulation predictor kits. They can be really helpful because they do test for a surge in LH, and that's the hormone that initiates the release of the egg. So tracking your mucus changes is usually sufficient, but if you want more information, and some people really love data more than others, or you want to of the clarity of the tests, just if you want just more information, basically, you can start using these about 3 days before you expect to ovulate, or subtract 17 days from when you expect your period to arrive. So if you're not sure, start testing earlier or follow the instructions on the particular kit that you've got. Ovulation will usually occur 24 to 36 hours after your positive result. So having sex as soon as you can after seeing a positive result is ideal. The kits are not 100% reliable, and they don't work that well for some women, particularly if you don't get a particularly strong LH serve. So a lot of women, for example, with PCOS, who may have several LH surges or high levels of LH throughout the cycle, they often struggle to get accurate results with these test strips. And so charting is better for them, although it can be very frustrating because it can take a very long time sometimes to actually ovulate. So many people also get confused about the value of taking their temperature when trying to conceive. There are a lot of arguments for and against, and often you'll find the medical fertility specialist will say it's more stressful than useful, so best not to bother at all. But I do beg to differ, because charting your temperature provides a lot of information, especially to someone like me trying to interpret the charts and give you good advice. And also, then I can help you to understand what your chart's telling you as well. And once you start to see your own unique patterns emerging, it's really quite easy to understand. So here's a little picture of hormone levels in your basal body temperature. So the hormone that affects your basal body temperature is progesterone. Okay, so it pretty much reflects what your temperature is doing through the cycle. So it's low in the first half of your cycle, as are your temperatures. So they'll bob up and down, and that's quite normal. And then as your progesterone starts to rise, it will do a little drop, and then you can see progesterone peaking in through here in the middle of this luteal or second half of your cycle, and your temperature is doing the same, and then it drops down. Now we do get all sorts of different pictures, and I'll go through a few of those with you shortly. So what you need is an oral digital thermometer, not an ear one, and it goes under your tongue. Okay, and ideally if you can find one that goes to 2 decimal places, that's great, because it is a bit more accurate. And you need somewhere to record your temperatures. Okay, so a chart, or if you're using an app on your phone, somewhere where ideally, again, if you can fit all this information that we're talking about in one place, that's really useful. So on waking, first thing in the morning, before you do anything active or have a glass of water or even talk, pop the thermometer under your tongue and wait for it to beep. Okay, so you don't need to put it under your arm or up your vagina or in your bottom, anywhere, just under your tongue. Record your temperature on your chart, which ideally you have by your bed with your thermometer, and remember to use a new chart for each cycle. Okay, and remember, day 1 is the first day of bleeding, not spotting. And if you do start bleeding in the evening, I would always say make day 1 the next day. Okay, and then ideally you're going to take that temperature at the same time each day, after at least 5 hours of consecutive sleep. And then also mark your regular waking time in it, and then record any variation. Because if you sleep in So that, you don't, it just means that you don't have to get up at the same time every day. So if you sleep in, you record the temperature and then adjust it down by adding a second mark, 0.05 degrees Celsius, which is usually, in my charts, it's one box lower for each half hour of extra sleep. And then you do the opposite for every half hour that you get up before your usual waking time. Okay, so this just is known as the temperature adjustment rule, and it just allows for different rising times, particularly for some people, you want to sleep in the weekends, or, you're a shift worker, all sorts of things that can, allow you a bit more flexibility. So usually we'll see what we call a thermal shift, which is a temperature increase of about half a degree Celsius, that indicates that ovulation's occurred. And I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. So the temperature starts to shift after the egg is released. Okay, so the rule is 3/5 to confirm that ovulation's occurred. You need to see 3 mornings of higher temperatures than the previous 5 to confirm ovulation. And this is why you can't use temperature to time your conception attempts, because once that shift's occurred, ovulation's already over and you've missed your chance for that cycle. You can, however, recall when you had sex and use your chart to see if you did get your timing right. So this is just a little graph of what we're talking about here. Okay, so you can see you've got your 5 days down, and then you've got 3 temperatures that are above, at least 0.05 degrees above this bottom one. So the day at the bottom of the rise is the most likely day of ovulation. Okay, but it is possible that it happened on any of these 2 days. And again, when you're recording your mucus as well, you can use these 2 methods together to help predict your actual day. So things that can affect your temperature include a late night, a fever, broken sleep, alcohol, sleeping in, and of course shift workers. Okay, and these can cause abnormally high or low temperatures. So always, if anything happens that you think, oh, maybe wasn't ideal, just make a record of it on your chart, and we can always go back and look at it later. And if there's no thermal shift, it's likely that ovulation hasn't occurred. So here is a graph, a classic, beautiful, what we call a whoosh chart. So this is a kind of perfect temperature chart, and I hope you can all see this well enough. Okay, so this person hasn't recorded their temps during their period, but I reckon it's really good to do that, because otherwise you forget. You kind of realize you got through to day 12 or 13, you've forgotten to take your temperature. So I reckon it's good to take your temperature all the way through the cycle. Okay, so you can see here really clearly you're able to get a line between the 2 phases, and this person has got a beautiful rise, okay, and the progesterone has stayed up really nicely through the second half of their cycle and then dropped just down just before their period. So this is kind of like your classic perfect graph, but don't panic, because not that many people get them. This one here, I'm hoping you can see this clearly. This one here, you can see there's no thermal shift, and this is what we call an anovular cycle, so ovulation hasn't occurred. Now, this chart is a bit more of an interesting one, and you might not be able to see all the details. But this chart here, you might think, so this is day 15 here, okay? So you might think, looking at it, that she had ovulated on day 15, all right? But because the next 2 readings were high, okay? But there are 3 reasons why this isn't the case. A, she had only 2 higher readings. B, she had the flu, which you may not be able to see in there, but she did have the flu during those temperature rise days, so on day 16 and 17, okay? So that's why her temperature rose then, and that could also have delayed ovulation. And she still had wet mucus, and she still had lots of wet mucus, okay? So there could have been several more higher readings, but because, that mucus hadn't ceased, it makes you think, oh, maybe this isn't correct. And you can see here that the more likely day of ovulation is actually this day here, which is day, oh gosh, I can't even read it myself. I think it's day 19, okay? And from there, she's gone up beautifully, and it stayed up. Now, if we think this is see her mucus has peaked the day before, and then it's dry, temperature's gone up, but it hasn't dropped, okay? And this is what we want to see, because this person has actually gotten pregnant. Okay, so you can see another phase starts to emerge. And I don't know, I get excited when I see these charts because I just think it's such a cool way to see that you've gotten pregnant. And then, of course, so once your temperatures readings have been raised for 18 days post-ovulation, you can be reasonably certain that you're pregnant. 20 higher readings, you can be really confident, but always, do double check with a urine pregnancy test as well. But that is what a pregnant temperature chart looks like. So, and this is just talking about that chart, so we won't look at that slide now. All right, so your practitioner, so someone like me, can use your charts to investigate other useful information that may affect your fertility as well. So it's a really good starting point, okay? It just can give us a bit of a look in to see if there's any problems or not, and help us to start investigating things a bit sooner than you might normally have. For example, if someone has consistently lower temperatures, particularly in that first half of the cycle, it can indicate a problem with their metabolism or thyroid function. If a period starts too soon after a thermal shift, there may be problems with progesterone production, which of course can affect implantation. All of these things require further investigation before diagnosis, but charting really can get you on the right track early on. So any issues that can impact on your chances of conceiving can be investigated without having to wait 1 or 2 or 3 years before you start that process. So a good question I also get asked is it normal for sex to become a chore? If it's taking longer to conceive than you expected, or you've got really specific fertility issues that may reduce your chances, even the healthiest relationships can come under strain. Many couples tell me they're losing the spontaneity, the romance, intimacy from their sex lives, and it's just becoming a chore. And this can all be compounded if you're undergoing, IVF or similar treatments, particularly also when you add in financial stress and also the medicalisation of your fertility. There's quite a lot of previous webinars recording on the Fertility New Zealand website also that you can go and have a listen to too, just if you find that this is happening to you, because it can just be helpful. There might be some little tips that might be useful and helpful for you. Another question I get asked is, are any sexual positions better than others for conception? I reckon the number one thing really is to get right is the timing. Otherwise, any position that works for you and gets the ejaculated sperm into the vagina can lead to conception. Deeper penetration to the cervix is recommended so the sperm get past the more acidic environment of the vagina. But again, the mucus should be alkaline, so that does also help to protect the sperm anyway. Any positions where gravity will draw some sperm down and away from the target could be avoided at the time of ejaculation, but that's just a suggestion, and I don't think it's particularly necessary because the sperm are pretty good as long as they don't have any issues with their motility. The sperm are, pretty good at swimming in the right direction. And actually, that's another thing before I move on is early on in your journey, even before you start trying to conceive, it's a really good idea to do a semen analysis, because you can spend a lot of time doing all of this, and then a year down the track and you find out your partner's got no or low sperm count. So it can save, again, a lot of angst and a lot of misery if you do check that and then early on, and then there's plenty of time to address the issue. Okay, another question. Should I remain lying down after sex? I don't think it's necessary to ensure the sperm reaches its destination. Okay, sperm is ejaculated in a viscous substance called semen, and that sperm and the semen will separate after ejaculation, and the sperm swims up through the cervix and into your uterus to start the journey to meet the egg, and the semen runs out. It might have a few sperm left in it, but they're not the ones you want anyway, so it's not a problem. A little rest and a snuggle after sex is great for your hormones and for your stress levels. So, it's a great thing, lovely idea, but it's not necessary in getting the sperm to the egg. Am I more likely to conceive if I have an orgasm? The short answer is no. While lacking in evidence, some believe that the orgasmic contractions of the uterus and the cervix might help to draw that sperm towards the egg. It's not necessary, but it's a bonus and it's a lot more fun if you can. Is it harmful to sperm to use a lubricant? A lot of lubricants contain spermicides, okay? So they can actively damage and destroy the sperm, and that's what a lot of them, are there for, and they will help prevent conception. So if you do need a lubricant, because you maybe not producing enough mucus or you get quite dry, you need to choose one that is fertility friendly. But again, if you can avoid using them around your fertile time, it's great because they can still change the pH of the vagina. And that's me done. Really, I've just popped my contact details in there if anyone wants to get in touch with me. And I will hand it back over to Lydia and see if we've got any questions.
Sometimes it can just take a wee while for the questions to come through, but I think that the way that you brought in your most commonly asked questions and addressed them straight away was really interesting. I know for me, something I was going to ask was that I had always been told when we were trying to conceive during that fertility period to have sex every second day. So I was really interested about the fact that you said that if you can, then okay as well. So I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Sorry, I just missed that last bit of what you were saying.
Oh,
sorry.
Just that when we were going through this, we were told to have sex every second day during the fertile period. And
yep.
you said earlier on that every day, if you can, is fine as well. And I just wondered what the pros and cons or what your thoughts were around that.
I don't, I've questioned this one over the years because, we always thought, well, if you've only got 3 or 4 days, then every second day, that's only 2 attempts, which is still going to get enough sperm there if you've got your timing right. And that's why, so some people feel that's enough, but other people feel like, daily makes them feel better, that they're giving things a good shot or they're, getting the window right. So, as long as you let your count build up in that 2 or 3 days before you start your conception attempts, there's enough sperm there to do what it needs to do. And it doesn't matter how often you have sex, it's just kind of just getting the sperm there. And yes, your count will decrease as the days go on. But again, I don't think it makes a great difference in the big picture.
Cool. And it was great that you included that question or that observation around can sex become a chore, because if you're feeling like that out there, don't feel alone, because we definitely felt like that at times, that it became just more of a functional activity rather than, good fun and spontaneity and romantic and all of that kind of thing. But
yes.
So that can be a challenge with the whole thing, but we just kept the end goal in sight, I guess you would say. Now we've got a question here. Is there an increase in cervical mucus once you are pregnant?
Yes, there is. And I found that, when I was first pregnant, I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Yes, there is. And nobody tells you that because your hormones are high. And there's a lot of it. So yeah, that's quite normal. I mean, if it's itchy or smelly or, causing any concern, get it checked, definitely, because infections in pregnancy can be very, very problematic. So it is always good to check, but yes, just an increase in cervical mucus is quite normal.
Cool. Thanks, Jo. There's still just coming through. What else can affect? You've mentioned odor a few times. Talked a lot about like texture and the color and some things. But what can affect odor, and does that have an impact on fertility as well? Obviously, if it's significant, you need to get it checked out. But is there anything else around that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's really with odor, it's infections, right? So it could be something like Gardnerella, or bacterial vaginosis, something like that. I used to be able to get all my clients get a GP to do swabs, cervical swabs, and check for infections, but that's getting tricky to do these days. But it's if you can, I think it's really useful, because again, ascending infections can be quite deleterious to getting pregnant, but also maintaining your pregnancy. So any odor, it shouldn't be smelly. So any odor you should probably get checked out, and if it's green, definitely get it checked out. And sometimes if you're taking supplements like B vitamins or even turmeric, that can sometimes make the mucus a bit more yellow, so that's okay. Don't worry about that side of things.
And Jo, did you just want to explain a little bit about what you do with your patients in terms of what services you provide and how you can help your patients as well?
Sure. So I'm a medical herbalist, and I've got a background in pharmacy, and so couples come to see me, and they might have fertility issues, or they might be just starting their journey. And so what we spend quite a lot of time going over your case history. I do go over, I'll talk to you about charting, because I do think it's really, really helpful, and at the start of your journey, and trying to understand for you what you're doing, but also for me diagnostically. So we'll go through your case, and I ask a lot of questions about your gut health, your hormonal health. And ideally males come as well, because they're contributing 50% of the goods. And we talk about diet and lifestyle, avoiding alcohol and smoking, and trying to avoid chemical exposure, whether that's just in daily life or through your work. And then there's a lot of blood tests, like medical tests, that we try and get done, which is getting a little trickier than it used to be, just because of funding and things like that. But so we try and get a lot of those preliminary tests. So we might check things like your vitamin D, your zinc, your copper, your thyroid function, your hormone levels for a male, or semen analysis, liver function. There's a whole heap of stuff. And then we kind of pull all this information together, look at your charts, and then I use herbs and nutrients to help support you through towards the conception, with a big focus on, whatever might be going on for you. We say someone's got a thyroid condition, we support that, but also a really big focus on egg and sperm health and quality as well, to really optimize your chances of a healthy conception and a conception. And this works too if you're preparing for IVF. In fact, it's really, really good if you can do a bit of preconception care before your IVF cycle, because it does seem to improve your chances of having good response, really. Yeah. So that's a very short, quick blurb of what I do.
It's fascinating, Jo. Thank you. Do women who have any allergy history have a reduced chance of conception? Is there anything that can be done about it, e.g. taking cod liver oil?
What kind of allergy history are you meaning? I'm wondering. If it's hay fever type stuff,
wants to add a little bit more context, please feel free to. But Jo.
So if you've got like food allergies, for example, yes, they can, because they'll affect your gut health, which will affect your ability to absorb and process nutrients from your food. Things like hay fever, those kind of allergies, I guess it's a kind of complex, but if you're using antihistamines, for example, for an allergy, then that can, because that dries your mucus secretions up, so it can actually dry up your cervical mucus secretions as well. So that's one aspect that doesn't really work that well. So we always look at other alternatives or ways to treat any allergies like hay fever and things like that.
Cool. Another person has just said that they are not based in Christchurch, where you are based. Do you offer online appointments?
I do, definitely, yes. There's one good thing that came out of COVID, our ability to use Zoom.
Yeah, and that's a great question. It has
Yeah.
given people a lot more access to different expertise and people around the country. So great question.
Yeah.
Awesome. How long after trying to conceive should you book in with a fertility specialist? And does a chemical pregnancy or miscarriage affect your ability to conceive again?
How long after how long after depends a bit on age as well. I think, because the closer you're getting to 40, the sooner I would encourage you to do that. I guess, they say, a year would say in your early years, mid 20s to early 30s, like a year at the most would be reasonable. But it's so hard. I try and catch people before they get, that far down the track, and then can guide you towards, what you can do before you see a fertility specialist, that kind of thing. Does that sort of answer that question? And then, can a chemical pregnancy or miscarriage affect your ability to conceive again? Depends the why, and if the why has been addressed. So a lot of people miscarry because they might have autoimmune factors going on, or chemical pregnancy. It might be something like your progesterone levels aren't rising properly. So it really does depend on the why, and if we manage to address that or not.
Thanks, Jo. Cool. Do you think period tracking apps to track ovulation are accurate?
No. Well, again, it goes back to the start, the thing I was talking about. They tend to use the rhythm method. Okay, so that was relying on you having a regular cycle. If you have a really regular cycle, they're not too bad. But if you have any variations, like some people will get their period, have a 28-day cycle, the next month it might be 34, and then it might be 23, or, then it doesn't work so well. I'm not a great fan because I haven't yet found one, but I'm open to finding one because I think it would be great, that kind of gathers up all the information that I like to see in one place. So if anyone finds one, let me know.
Could be a market there for you, Jo.
Yeah. My tech, as you've probably noticed, my tech savviness is somewhat lacking, though.
Cool. Awesome. So just if there's any final questions, we'll finish up shortly. But thank you so much, Jo. I've learned heaps today as well. I'm always learning, and I love it. And this has been a fabulous webinar. So I'm so pleased so many people could join us today. Here we go. Here's one. What about the Flow app? So that must be one particular.
Yes, I think that one is not too bad. Again, it's about also how much you use it and how much information you put in, as well. So the more data you collect, the quicker you learn, and the more useful it is to someone like me trying to help you.
That makes sense. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jo. So much valuable information and insight on this topic. And thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I don't know where you are in the country, but it's cold and miserable where I am today. So I hope you are bundled up somewhere warm and dry. Make sure to follow us, Fertility New Zealand, online, and keep up to date with our webinar series. Our next one, Navigating Fertility, the role of the fertility nurses, is on Tuesday, the 11th of June, with Christine Martin, who is the charge nurse at Fertility Plus in Auckland. Christine is going to talk to us about what we can expect at a first appointment, drug orientation, and much more. And have a look at our library of past webinars on our website. We've got a huge range of topics there, and with some excellent presenters. Jo's presented with us on a number of occasions before. Thank you so much, Jo. And we've got topics on there, including top questions to ask my doctor, managing anxiety with infertility, genetic testing and what to expect aspect, and so much more. So a big thank you, Jo, for your time tonight and your time in preparing this really, really valuable presentation. And also a massive thank you goes to Merck, who is our sponsor of our webinar series. Really appreciate it. And I just hope that Jo and everybody out there enjoys the rest of your evening, and we will hopefully see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.